Because I grew up in pubs, I used to be able to deal with people from all walks of life. I've always been a bit of a goody two-shoes, always a bit too scared. I'd always get caught for anything. There's the glass ceiling of being a female, then the paper ceiling of not having the qualifications, not having a degree. I was finally working for this company that I used to daydream about being an air hostess for, and the thought of ever leaving it had never ever crossed my mind. And I said, it's Bentley, and he went, oh shit, you need to do it.
Kirsty Mason, CIO of Bentley Motors. Welcome to Solar for CIO. Nice to have you here at last.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I know you're not completely new to the gig, but CIO, Bentley Motors, iconic brand. Does it still sound good to you?
It does, and it's still not lost on me. Every day when I walk through our campus and you see so many Bentleys, it's still great every day.
How do you think it would have sounded to you as a teenager? You know what I mean?
I don't think that teenage girl would have ever believed that she would be a CIO at Bentley one day.
Pretty cool. And look, one of the things I find is all the CIOs we speak to, so many of them are writing a book or have a book in them or just have a really strong sense of personal biography, almost like it's a defining characteristic of what drives people to the top of their career, effectively. And you are no exception. You definitely have a book in you, and I hope to hear a lot of it today. But honestly, from our first conversation, you have the chapter title. I can't quite remember it, but I think it had. I'm sorry, excuse my language, but I think it had bastards in it. It definitely had gropers in it. Remind me what it was. What was the chapter title?
It's bigots, sexists, and gropers.
It wasn't bastards, but
So no, there's no swear words in any of the chapters. Not yet, anyway.
Oh yeah, not yet.
First version.
Excuse my French, YouTube. But look, you're describing then the workplace when in your career, when in terms of time.
So this is when it was like the late 80s, early 90s. So if you've ever seen Life on Mars, and that's the police force in those eras, it's very similar to that. So the workplace is thick with tobacco smoke because people smoked at the desk back then. Page 3, calendars on the walls for everyone to see. Lots of imagery that is just how it was.
And so one more time for those of that. Bigots, what? And
Sexist.
Bigots, sexist. Unbelievable. I mean, do you think that it was, do you think it's just characteristic of, because that's not a world away, right? Like late 80s, 90s. It's not another time or anything. Like, was it characteristic of all workplaces at the time? Do you think IT, God forbid, was particularly prone to sexism or kind of retrograde attitudes? I don't know.
I think it was not just IT, and I worked for Raw Mail back then, so a very traditional male-dominated industry at that time because it was all about postal workers, and but I was in the head office in the HQ, but it was a real eye opener. Is all I can say.
Kirsty, so excited to have you on the show, so excited to talk to you, because that book that you're going to write one day is a fantastic one. And I think, with any good book, you've got to start at the beginning. Maybe tell people a little bit about yourself and where you come from.
So I'm from Chesterfield in Derbyshire, so a market town in sort of the middle of England. I grew up there. My parents divorced when I was very young. So one of my first early memories was actually as they were going through a divorce and fighting over custody of me. And I remember being sat on a bench outside a courtroom, and the judge came out with his red robes and his white hair and said, your mum and dad are fighting really hard in there, and I've got the job to decide where you go to live. He said, I want to know what you think. And that's sort of the first memory I've got of my childhood, which is quite bizarre.
A little on the traumatic side.
Yeah.
You might even say it. And what was it like as a place to grow up, the town, etc.?
So I think back then, again, women were at home, so they didn't go out to work. They didn't have ambitions or careers or aspirations, or certainly not in the town that I was from. And my family had pubs. They ran different pubs in sort of the village where I grew up, and I think their biggest aspiration for me was that one day I'd have a pub, which is not something that I ever wanted to do. I probably seeing what used to happen, and seeing lots of drunk people. It wasn't sort of where I wanted to be. But I didn't really know back then what I wanted to do. I just remember always wanting to travel and see the world because there was a globe, there was a drinks cabinet. They were very popular in that era. And I used to spin this round and see all the places. And I used to think about all the places one day I'd be able to go to in the world.
And were you working incredibly hard at school? Were you a good student? Were you ambitious as a teenager, or?
So
Mhm.
I went to an all girls grammar school, and to get into this school, you had to take an entrance exam. So it wasn't private, but it was the closest thing to private. I did that exam. I applied and did the exam myself. I didn't tell my family because, again, they didn't have any ambitions for me. And I got into this school, and I was in all the top sets. I was in all the school sports teams. So I think I've always been quite competitive and liked being in those teams. So netball, hockey, badminton, tennis. I used to be really good at gymnastics as well. So I was really into all of that. But the other thing that I was really interested then was computers as well. I really loved the computer science class, as it was called back then.
Did you have a computer in the house, or is it?
So when I was, I think probably about 11 or 12, a neighbour had they were in IT, and they'd had a new computer, and they gave me their old ZX Spectrum, which was kind of a rubber keyboarded device that you'd plug into your TV. And I used to buy Computer Weekly magazine and copy the code out, and I was just really fascinated by what appeared to me to be random letters, words, and numbers. I could make my name appear and bounce around the screen and in different colours, and that's probably where my first fascination came from computers. And I used to love Tomorrow's World, which is a bit nerdy for a girl back then.
For non-UK viewers, a fantastic television program on the BBC, wasn't it?
It was,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, and it was like, here's what the future's gonna look like.
Yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
you did, however, leave school, as we discussed prior, at 15, right? And
yeah.
actually, in this country, to leave school at 15 and to then go on to the absolute top of your career, it's a pretty unusual path. So talk to us about that, and
Mm.
and how your life began post school.
Yeah, so at school, it wasn't that I couldn't do the work, and I was in all the top sets, and I used to get really good grades. But I just still had this obsession with seeing the big wide world, and back then, Virgin Atlantic had launched, and I remember seeing air hostesses on the adverts. It was all gloss and glamour, and I wanted to be a Virgin air hostess. I've got my ideas completely set, and nothing could change me. And I'd spend hours daydreaming, looking out of the window and stuff like that, thinking, I can't wait to get out of this town and go and see the world. And I I decided that I was going to get a couple of jobs, which I did, and I left school, much to my family's dismay. So I didn't take any of my exams, um, and left school, and then realised that being 5'5", I wasn't tall enough to be an air hostess. So back then, 5'6", barefoot, and if you didn't meet the height restriction, you couldn't be an air hostess back then.
That is it, because of the jump seats?
It was the safety as well, because the
Yeah.
overhead cabins and the bins and the
Okay.
lockers. Yeah, so it's all to do with safety, essentially. So that kind of dream was shattered, and I was in a bit of, "Oh, okay. So what now then?" And then my next love was technology.
And you've mentioned encountering technology, but what about encountering it professionally as a viable career path? What was that encounter?
So it was really hard to get a job. I thought about, well, do I go back to school? But I just wasn't interested. I just wanted to sort of get out there and
Yeah.
do things. So I went through sort of various stages. I did the usual things. So you work in a bar, you work in a shop, you do this, that, and the other. And I finally managed to get an entry level role at Royal Mail, working in the software development division, which was when back back in the day, year 2000 was coming, and everybody realised that the dates that people had written into the code might not be able to cope with the clock ticking over to the year 2000.
Yes.
So there were all these horror
Oh,
stories.
the Millennium Bug, was
The
that?
Millennium Bug, yeah,
Millennium Bug.
that's
Yeah,
the one.
people won't remember maybe some,
Yes,
but the whole society was, the whole world was seized by the terror of what was
yes.
going to happen. Yeah.
So the development division was essentially going through lines and lines of code, looking for these sets of date parameters, so that any recoding that needed to be done could be done. So I just got just at the lowest entry level role in Royal Mail and started there. And people thought planes were going to fall out of the sky. They thought that submarines were going to sink,
Yeah.
that the banking systems would collapse. And that sort of started in '98. So they were well in advance prepping towards it.
Was it your efforts that ensured that within
I
societies?
I wish
could
I wish
collapse?
no, it absolutely wasn't. There was hundreds of people working on it, not just in Royal Mail, but everywhere. So the irony is that a few years later, when the year 2000 was kicking in, I'd moved from there into a service management type role. Um, and by then I'd got my daughter, who was 3, and this is probably where some of the sexism kicks in. They suggested that I should be the one who's on call for New Year's Eve because I'd be at home anyway because I'd got a child.
Got it. Yeah.
I just saw the monetary return, thinking, well, I will be anyway, but you didn't know that, and I'll take. I think it was £200. Back then was quite a bit of money.
Not a bad, not a bad take home for a shift. No.
Yeah.
So you're a relatively young mother, in
Yes.
addition to leaving school pretty young, right?
Yes.
I mean, how do you balance out to the degree that was hugely motivating for you, with the degree that it was something that made career advancement even more difficult? Do you know what I mean? Where would you place the emphasis, do you think?
So I think the one thing I'd always tried to say to myself, because my mum and dad divorced, if I ever had a child, I wanted to be married and I didn't want to get a divorce. So that didn't happen either. So lots of these things that I'd planned for myself didn't quite land the way that I'd hoped they would. But I always wanted to set a good example to her, and having had this initiation, we'll call it, into the workplace, I never wanted her to go through those things that I went through when you started in the workplace. So I think I always wanted her to see that if you did work hard and you were motivated, that you could do well. So that was something that I wanted her to see. And also that it didn't matter that you were a female, you still can go on and do things and progress. But it came with a lot of sacrifices, I would say, along the way, that today I encourage people not to make that same level of sacrifice that I had to make.
Well, that you had to make. I mean, if you,
Yeah.
yeah. So you don't want those sacrifices to be necessary for people, but
Yes. Yeah.
I guess you still encourage people to do what's necessary to get
Yeah.
to where you need to get to, right?
Yeah.
How did how did your career go from entry level IT job, Royal Mail, to starting to develop into something really, really substantial and with huge potential?
So a funny story. So he's one of the heroes in one of the chapters of this book. And he was a manager, a departmental manager of the service management and delivery team. And he had someone reporting into him, and that they managed 6 females. Now I was the youngest of
This is Royal Mail, by the
Raw
way,
Mail,
still.
yes,
Yeah.
Raw Mail. So he managed. So there was senior manager, 6 females. I was the youngest of the 6 females. Manager was leaving, so this team manager position becomes available. All the other 5 applied, and I was like, there's no way on this earth I want to have to manage those 5 people, because I know everything that they do. I know all of the tricks. I know, and I just thought
Oh.
I knew that it wasn't okay. But I also thought I don't want to have to deal with that because I'm the youngest.
What kind of tricks are we talking about here?
So nothing bad. They'd
Just-
come in and so they'd clock each other in and have longer lunches and things like that. Sort of things that people would do, or leave early and then somebody would clock them out and things like this. And it was just kind of what everybody did back then, I think. But I've always been a bit of a goody two shoes and always a bit too scared because I'd always get caught for anything. Um, and so they all applied for the role. The interviews are happening, and the manager said, "Kirsty, you've not applied." I said, "No." He said, "Well, we'd like you to go through the process anyway, because at least then that'll give you some feedback, in terms if you do want to progress." And so I did the interview, and then I got the job. I was like, "I don't want the job." And they said, "But you've got the job. You're the best person for the job." So the others were really unhappy because I'd said I wasn't applying. I hadn't applied, and I hadn't formally done the application. He just wanted me to go through the interview process.
Do you think you were looking at your career then not so much as a career in which there was going to be opportunity to progress, or were you, and it was just that workplace, that specific moment you didn't fancy it?
No, I felt really lucky just to have a job
Yeah, sure.
back then, and I think because of my lack of qualifications, I'd call it the paper ceiling. So there was I felt like there's the glass ceiling of being a female, then the paper ceiling of not having the qualifications, not having a degree.
Never heard that phrase. Did you invent
I
that
didn't
phrase?
invent that.
No,
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 it
it's
is
cool.
a thing. Yeah. So I didn't really expect much. I just wanted to have a job to be able to provide for my daughter. And never really anticipated that I could go on. Most definitely not to where I am today.
So opportunity was thrust upon you.
It was.
Your other colleagues in the team were a little resentful, maybe, but how did things develop from there?
So interestingly, one of them is one of my best friends still today, which is really interesting.
No, I actually maybe she wasn't.
Eventually,
Fair enough.
but it was just really interesting. So then I call that my baptism of fire into management in the workplace, and then having to sort of deal with what we'd call now as behavioural and performance issues. They weren't called that back then. Um, and it was very different, the sort of process that you go through back then as to what you go through now. We have proper HR processes and policies and procedures in place. It was a bit more loose
Mm.
back in those days as well.
And so what lessons did you have to take from the baptism of fire, and what qualities did you discover in yourself that were a good fit for leadership and for management?
So I think I've got a keen sense of right and wrong. So it's either right or it's wrong. And while people might see shades of grey, there's still right and there's still wrong. And so when it comes to, well, you shouldn't be clocking out for your friend because they're going to lunch, and you shouldn't be letting them do that. That's wrong. Can we not do that in the future? And they tested me to see, well, if I do that, what are you going to do about it? So we had to go through those kinds of things, and I think, um, I'd say I was always firm but fair because I wanted to do my job well and I wanted to do my job properly. And that doesn't mean letting people get away with things. You've sometimes got to have the tough and hard conversations.
It's interesting. Of all the discussion you hear about leadership qualities, and I don't think I've ever heard someone say a clear sense of what's right and wrong. You don't actually hear those terms even discussed in a business setting very much today, right? But they're important, aren't they? They define you as a fair person, and that defines you as a good leader, I think. And at this point, are you starting to look differently at what is now officially a career in IT, and where it might go next for you?
Um, I don't think so. I think it was a little bit later when Royal Mail, the IT department, was being outsourced. So I was part of the team that was pulled together to write all the service level agreements and all the things, and they call it a war room. So you go in there, you're doing all this documentation, and there was someone from the sort of company that was then taking us over who was working closely with me and just said, you could go a lot further. Why are you holding yourself back? And it was the first person who'd ever really saw that potential in me to move into more from a team manager to having a bit more responsibility. And then I was then moved over to the company that took over the IT element. And that's really where I saw more commercial IT as opposed from an IT department in Royal Mail, where it was more about making money from those contracts. So that was quite a stark contrast to where you were just had internal customers. People who used to be my colleagues in Royal Mail were now my customers. So they, you could have a nice chat with them at the coffee machine before, but then suddenly when they're paying this external company to deliver something that's not getting delivered, that conversation wasn't as nice. So again, that was a real learning experience moving over to that side.
Well, what about your skill set and your passion for technology? How are those developing in tandem, or are they, they diminishing
So
a little?
So I think I'd moved more away from the tech side into service management and delivery and that customer relationship management. But I think because I grew up in pubs, I used to be able to deal with people from all walks of life. So, the mayor could be sat at the end of the bar one day, and then you'd have workers coming in at the end of the day where after work, all men would go to the pub generally and have a pint and probably stay there until about 8:30 until children had gone to bed, and then they'd go home. That was so it was I was able to talk to people from all different walks of life. So moving to that more service orientated, it didn't really phase me. I actually liked talking to people, I think more than being sat with letters and numbers.
Soul of the CIO is sponsored by Nextvink. Now, if you work in IT, you'll know too well how disruptions can derail productivity fast. Nextvink's AI-powered platform for digital employee experience keeps you ahead. It uncovers issues others can't see and resolves them automatically with employee-centric AI and always-on automation. Employees stay productive, IT stays proactive and even preventative, and leadership sees results. Nextvink, ahead of every IT disruption, behind every strategy. Learn more at nextvink.com. Go on, keep walking me through it, because we're going to get to Bentley, we're going to get to the modern digital workplace and what you're focused on now. But how do we get, because we're still a little distance away from
Yeah,
what you're doing.
yeah. So I then I'd worked for this company, and whilst I was there, I was thinking, there's me, there's my daughter. I want to be able to do better. I want to be able to take her on holidays, which meant I needed to earn more money. And back then, I'd seen contractors come in, day rate contractors. Some of them were brilliant, but they were expensive, or I could see they were earning probably 2 or 3 times what I was earning. And I used to think, I could do what they're doing stood on my head, and that was sort of thing that sort of said, actually, then I can do some travel in the world and I can take my daughter with me. So as with most outsourcers, the voluntary redundancy rounds then start coming up afterwards. And I got it on my third attempt at getting voluntary redundancy, only at the point when the manager who'd given me that opportunity in the first place, he got his. He said, "You're not going anywhere until I get mine." And when he got his, he signed mine off. And then I knew I needed to move away from Chesterfield because there wasn't a lot of opportunity there. So in 2001, I'd got my redundancy and I moved to Manchester, and bought a house there. So I don't think I'd thought it through too much, because I'd gone to Manchester from Chesterfield, 40 miles away from my family, my support network. Didn't know anybody there either. So found a place to live, got my daughter into school. And it had to then, be close to where I'd managed to find a job, which was at a software development company. So I was running the software development division, but there was lots of client interface. So it was in the early days of .com, and this company was developing all of the quotes engines, that sat behind Money Supermarket and things like that. And I remember it being a really innovative thing that there was a postcode lookup. So that was so when that first came out. Now, if it didn't have that, you'd think a website was really bad. But that was a real novelty that you could even do that back in those days. So I stayed there. I was in charge of about 100 people. So it was quite a jump from going from big step up. And it was, again, a bit of a baptism of fire, because developers are probably renowned for being quite introverted, a bit nerdy. I'm more extroverted and not so nerdy. So I like to go in and talk to people and have a chat. And I think at the time I thought, oh God, they all hate me. But it wasn't, it was just their personality type. So very different to mine. But after a while, it worked really well. I built a good project team that was delivering the projects for the different customers. And I'm still friends with all of those people now, actually, who were there then back in my team. So we're still, by the power of Facebook, later connected, and I'm still connected to those people. I then moved into the airlines, so I went over to First Choice Airways. And again, that was more in the project program world. And they were reconfiguring, so not building. So they'd bought 4 aircraft, and they were all being reconfigured out in the desert. So the program that I was running was about all of the design and installation of everything that would be on those aircraft. So a little bit away from technology, more in a project and program type world. And back in the day, it was when I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here first came out. And one of the big adverts that they did was for First Choice was on their program, because it was all about the extra legroom that they were putting on board. And it was the first airline that was looking to trial on board massage therapy and things like that. So really innovative in terms of the proposition that they were putting onto the aircraft. Again, it got me closer to wanting to travel the world, working for an airline. So it's just like another stone.
Air miles or something, surely.
So we used to get really good trips. So the cost of trips were really good. I went to the Maldives twice. I went to a number of places in the Caribbean, just on some amazing staff deals. So it started to get me that bit of my dream that I was looking for. But again, I'd moved more away from the IT space. So then I left there and went to work for another outsourced service provider, more back into the tech space. But the first role I had with this company was managing the program, and it was with the Department of Work and Pensions. So it was when they were first putting in an IT system that replaced the IT officers. So if something happened with your computer, you'd phone IT. A guy would come along with his bag of spanners and his bits and bots, and he would take your desktop computer apart and fix things. But what they were doing is replacing that with an online tool where you'd have to log an incident. So the first kind of IT help desk that they were putting in for the Department of Work and Pensions. And I had to drive from Manchester to Lytham St Anne's, so probably about 40 miles away. And when I got to the site, it was a picket line. So as I'm trying to drive into the site, I've got people banging on my car. And I was just like, what on earth is going on? I really wasn't prepared for that.
Got it. I mean, what are your reflections around this time on the way that the dynamic between technology and the business is starting to evolve and develop, right?
Yeah.
This is through the noughties we're effectively discussing.
Yeah, the early noughties. So I think this is where people were starting to use technology for business processes, where the workers were really reacting negatively towards that. A bit like we're seeing now in the age of AI. Everybody's really scared of this thing that's going to make the workplace more efficient. And it's almost like that happening again, but it's just the technology's evolved. So there was a lot of resistance, whereas on the flip side with AI, everybody wants it, kind of,
Kind of, yeah.
And so I think that's the difference. It's like that renaissance of the technology, and I still remember that you kind of knew that the big systems were really cumbersome and wouldn't be able to do everything. So this is where the technology landscapes really evolved from having these big enterprise systems going, "Oh, it doesn't quite do everything the way we'd like to do it." And so then they'd buy another system and another system and another system and another system. And that's what makes the IT companies can become really complex. You can't get systems to talk to each other, or integration's really hard. When something breaks, it's really hard to know where in that ecosystem it's broken. So IT incidents would take a long time to resolve. So that really complex world of IT is what was evolving, because there was no real enterprise view of IT. It was all about spot solutions for different problems right across the business, instead of thinking about the whole thing and how can we pull all of this together, which is where I am now, actually, at Bentley.
Yeah, it brings us bang up to date. But before we get there, and we think about that balance of the human professional and technology, which I think Bentley is kind of exploring very ambitiously and with
Yeah.
great interest. Let's come back to the glass ceiling and the paper ceiling,
Yeah.
which at some point you've burst through both, right?
Yeah.
And where do you think those moments were?
So I think when I left Royal Mail, I'd been there for 12 years. So I'd kind of burst through the first bit because I'd got a lot of experience.
Yep.
So when I did my application, people used to say, "Oh, it's missed the bit where your qualifications are." And so then I'd used to have that awkward conversation. Actually, no, it hasn't. Or they'd think I'd not sent the back page. Um, and then later on, again, I'd worked for these other sort of companies, so I'd got lots of experience across multiple industries. So not only had I worked in the techie bit, I'd worked in the service bit, I'd worked in the project and program management elements, and I'd worked in multiple different industries. So I think that experience then started.
That outweigh that
Yeah,
absence.
yeah.
100%. 100%. And what were the were there opportunities that if you hadn't got them at that moment, mentors, if they hadn't been there at that moment, you might not have been ready or in a position to get the opportunity at somewhere like Bentley?
I think before I went to Bentley, I'd worked for um, two other CIOs, so direct reporting, essentially with all the responsibility, but not the job title. And when I was at Virgin, they did an external mentorship program, which was part of the Women in Hospitality, Travel and Leadership, run by a lady called Tia Coliani. And I was mentored by a gentleman called Dan Wynn, who's at the time the CFO for Deliveroo. And he said to me, he said, "You're doing the job, you're capable of doing the job, but if you want that job title, you're going to have to leave." And that was just like, I was finally working for this company that I used to daydream about
Yeah.
being an air hostess for, and the thought of ever leaving it had never ever crossed my mind. So it was something that I sort of thought, I'm going to need to take that away and sit with that one for a little bit and see how I feel about it. And I thought, he's right, because the CIO reported into another board member. It's never nice thinking about it's kind of dead man's shoes, isn't it? The higher up you go in the chain, the less opportunity.
Yep.
And people don't leave Virgin. They really don't, because it's a great sort of company to be part of. And so I was thinking, what's my chances? How long do I want to wait? And I was headhunted. So I got a call, and even when they said to me, I said, "No, I don't really want to leave Virgin." Said, "Well, what would you be looking for?" I said, "Well, I'd only leave if it was actually a CIO role." And she said, "Well, that's good, because it is a CIO role." So I was like, "Oh, right, okay." But I still didn't want to leave, so I got the role, and actually, the scale of the role was much smaller than I'd had in both Virgin and when I was at the cruise line. So in
Step up
theory,
in title, step back in scope of
exactly. So I'm
responsibility.
thinking, well, that's kind of quite nice. I'm getting so I then sort of went through and had these conversations, and when they were saying they were progressing me to the next stage, I don't think it really dawned on me I was in an application process, because in my head I wasn't leaving Virgin. But I was going through and I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen is they can offer me the job. So 8 interviews later, when I got this job offer, I was just like, I can't not take it.
Yeah.
I literally can't not take this opportunity. And it was, I remember having to put my resignation in and still not quite believing what I was doing, because it meant, again, relocating from the south coast of England, um, by the beach. So I used to be able to go to the beach every morning. Loved that. Um, Again, to somewhere where I didn't know anybody, didn't have a support network. There's a bit of a theme. I kind of throw my whole life up in the air and see how it all lands. Um, and so then I took the job, and my mentor at Virgin, who's the chief commercial officer still, and we're still in regular contact. He rang me to try and convince me not to leave Virgin. He's going, "You've got a great future here. We all love you. We don't want you to leave." And I said, "Well, but I've got this chance of an opportunity." The CEO took me for a coffee and said, "We don't want to leave you. You'll hate automotive. Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I don't want to say, because I didn't want anybody phoning them to say don't give her the job, because by then I wanted the job." So I then I said, "No, I am going to go,"
Yeah.
and it was really tough. And then my Yuha, who was the chief commercial officer, he rang me and he said, you shouldn't do this. It's the wrong thing." And he said, "Tell me where it is." And I said, "It's Bentley." And he went, "Oh shit, you need to do it." He said, "You're going from an amazing brand," he said, to Bentley. He said, you've got to do it."
And you might, who knows, you might end up back Virgin one day, one day. But let's not preempt ourselves. Here's what's so interesting to me about Bentley
Yeah.
is as a brand, as an iconic brand, as an automobile brand, it's that it is so defined by craftsmanship,
Yeah.
right? And yet it's in a space which is increasingly defined by technology. So you get that mixture of the employee and the need to be enhanced by and add, complemented by the very latest technology.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that balance and what that means for a CIO there.
So it's really interesting at Bentley, because at that sort of 8 interview process, the flip point for me was when I came on site, actually, to Bentley. And you sort of enter what's called Pim's Lane, and there's a showroom. So they don't actually sell cars from there, but it's a place where, customers who are looking to buy Bentley can come and they can see some of the vehicles. There's heritage cars in there. So there's a Bentley blower, which was the first Bentley in there. And so I went into this essentially car showroom, and then I got picked up in a Bentley. And they drove me up the campus, which is probably only a 5-minute walk, and it's a 10-mile-an-hour speed limit. So I could have probably walked it in quite the same amount of time, but I was in a Bentayga. So they'd asked me what was my favourite Bentley. They didn't tell me why they'd asked
Are
me
they
this.
interviewing you at this point? Are they trying to, they're courting you for the job? I don't know.
So I didn't know where I was in the process at this time either, because it had been going on for a long time. And then they had one of the tour guides take me around a tour of the production line on this day before I had another round of interviews. And I was absolutely blown away that I could be in this one site that's the HQ, the factory, everything is there. And so you could see the pride and the passion, and that's not stuff that people were turning on because somebody was walking around, because they have people there all the time.
Yeah.
I don't think they even notice people walking around anymore. But sort of the machinists and the hand stitching. So if you wanted your family logo on your seats, you can have it, and they might hand stitch some of this. When you go to the wood shop, and you can see them hand polishing the wood that all comes from one single trunk that you get to pick. And then that's then so that there's not any differentiation in the grain throughout the interior of your Bentley. And it's all this, the attention to detail. You go into the paint shop, and if I said, I want this colour of leather, and it's the same colour as my jacket, and then I might have a colour on my nails, and I want this colour on the outside, they will make that car exactly how you want it. And so this is where that handcrafted is still there. And I think there's something like over 3 million different combinations that you could have of a Bentley for all of the different options, and then probably at least one or two others because they might not have even thought of it yet because it's someone's new idea.
How does that translate, first of all, from the manufacturing perspective
Yeah.
into the 21st century car market? How does Bentley aspire to strike that balance between handcrafted to order, very personalized with the need for electronic cars, AI integration, etc.?
So there is a balance because those are the things that are the differentiator for Bentley. So you've got cars that are fast, you've got cars that are luxurious, but then you've got Bentley that is fast and luxurious. So that's the difference. That's the differentiator of the Bentley. And where we're really using technology is to use it to get through data and data processing, so we can get to these answers and these latest innovations more quickly, which brings that speed to market and new innovations to customers.
And how does that break down into a remit for a CIO, and how ambitious were you expected to be in the role?
So when I went to Bentley, it was not like any IT function that I've seen before. I think it had been through a number of, they were called transformations, but they're not necessarily what I'd call a transformation. And everybody's done that word to death over the years as to digital transformation. But what I needed to understand is the beyond 100, as it was then, it's now beyond 100 plus company vision. And then you have to then take that back to say, well, what's the technological capability that we need to have in place to deliver that system? And it's been a big education piece with the business to move them away from thinking, I want this system, that system, the other system, because they've been to a conference and they've been sold a dream, to saying, well, what is it? What's the capability that you're looking for? So a really simple example is we need Tableau, and I say, why do you need Tableau? Well, you're visualizing data. So you need data visualization capability. What data do you want to visualize? So taking it away from the solution, say, what's the outcome that you're looking for? What's the business problem? And then working back from there. So we've been doing that for 18 months now, working really closely with the business, looking at the business strategy, looking at the functional strategies, and saying what capability don't they currently have through technology, and then linking that back to our systems roadmap. So it's very much entwined, business and IT together.
I guess you want to give your craftspeople as much choice
Yeah.
and as much option as the Bentley customer is
Exactly.
given, right?
Yeah.
How do you translate that in real world terms around AI specifically, and what's the AI roadmap looking like for you?
So R&D, as you can probably imagine, we're on this fairly early in terms of wanting to test and trial different capability. For me, it's really important that we do AI in the right way. Again, probably going back to, we need to think about what we're doing really carefully and make sure that any tools that we're using are not having any bias in there, and all things like that we need to be really careful about, and that we protect our employee data, our customer data, and have all of those measures around that. So it's all the boring stuff around governance, guardrails, and all of that, but that's the really important stuff. So I work very closely with our Chief Strategy Officer, I've said it's really important that the business sets the AI strategy, and I will deliver the technological capability that provides that. So that's where we work in partnership, because it's not for the CIO to define the AI strategy. It's for the business to say, how do we want AI to enhance what we deliver in terms of our products and services? And then I can find the tools and make sure we're doing that in a safe way.
100%. Go ahead 2-3 years, something like that. What does success look like in this role for you? What are you planning to be able to point to and demonstrate?
So we have a really clear plan to 2030 in terms of the Beyond 100 plus company strategy. We've worked very closely with the business to put that definition, say what does that technological roadmap look like that then enables that. So for me, it's executing against that plan. Now, I know that plan will change. It will change because it has to change, and we're not carving this in a tablet of stone and we just execute against it blindly. You always have to keep your head up and be looking out across the market to see what's the best thing that delivers that capability. And that's the beauty of using a capability in terms of going to implement this software or that software. You're focusing on the right thing at the right time and doing that work around bringing that right thing in. So for me, we will have a streamlined technological roadmap that is the minimum systems that we possibly need, that reduces complexity of our end-to-end business processes. That will reduce the cost and the complexity of the organisation. And hopefully that will drive down how soon we can react and respond to things, because under all of that is the data that we will have around our business that we're then sitting the AI on top of, that actually brings those solutions even quicker.
Amazing. You asked earlier when you came into the studio, these were props, Kirsty. This is actually our sponsor, Nextthink, who coined the term digital employee experience. So we do want to ask all our guests about what is the ideal aspiration around DEX, digital employee experience in their workplace, whether.
So our comms team are really, really big on this. So we're doing a lot of work with them at the minute. So we have launched an employee app as well, which is a new thing for our employees in terms of on their own device. Even they can get to things like their payslip, and they can log on to our intranet and see company updates and things like that. So the digital employee experience is really important. It keeps people connected to the company at any time. They don't need to be in the workplace to do that.
Absolutely. And interested, I mean, your career you've seen a lot of change in the industry through your career. I think it's fair to say, from your time at Royal Mail, in many senses, right?
Yeah.
But certainly in terms of that dynamic between the business and technology. Where do you see the CIO role going in the next few years? Do you see it as a title, as a remit that is even going to exist in, say, 5 years' time? And if not, what does it become? What's the dynamic at play here?
So I think the role of the CIO has massively evolved anyway. So it used to be the head of IT, and the head of IT, back in the day, you'd find them twiddling with a Wi-Fi router on the ceiling or under a desk somewhere, fiddling about with cables. And that's most definitely what I don't do in my job today. It's much more about being um, the person at the board table who is understanding that business strategy and finding the way that you can deliver that through technology. And I think you're always going to need that, no matter what it's called. You still need somebody who's essentially the Babel fish, I call it, that can translate technology into business speak and vice versa. So you need somebody who can understand what the board are wanting, translate that to your technical teams, and vice versa.
Um, I know mentorship's been really important to you in your career, and it's something that preoccupies you now in terms of wanting to give back and give guidance. If you were talking to a young woman, 15-year-old who just left school, looking maybe towards a career in technology themselves,
Yeah.
what would your advice be at this juncture?
So I've seen how IT's changed in a relatively small window. So for me, it's anything is possible. Dream bigger, because where we are today, some of the roles that exist today, they didn't exist, even 10 years ago. And we're talking about skills for the future and jobs for the future. I don't think we know what some of them are. Again, who was a UX UI designer? That didn't exist. Digital experience, that didn't exist for employees. But all of these things are really key, crucial jobs now. So just jump in and just enjoy it, and enjoy the time there, and just learn and absorb as much as you can.
I love it. And actually, a last question for you, if I may. When you look across the CIO landscape and you think this is hype, and something stands out to you as hype, as overhyped, what is it, and why should we look at it differently?
I think there's been lots of things over the years. I mean, a couple of years ago, it was all blockchain,
Yeah,
and that's gone.
mentioned in the
You know
previous
that
interview.
that's gone really quiet. AI is definitely not going away.
Yeah,
I think AI is the thing that we do have to make sure that we're using that as a force for good, because the power that can bring, if we do use that in the right way. I know it's scary, and the people who invented it have all run away, but we need to sort of get back in there and do the right thing with it.
so funny. All everyone was talking about 2, 3 years ago was blockchain, and
Exactly.
when was the last time I heard anyone
Yeah.
mention blockchain?
Yeah.
Kirsty, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on Solar for CIO. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.